Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I'm sorry I was in a meeting that went over, so I'm actually doing this show live from a coffee shop in Cary, North Carolina. But I wanted today to welcome you all to World Edition, where we talk about global affairs, innovation, and an increasingly turbulent and divisive world. Today on the show, we have dedicating the first 30 minutes to Nigeria. There have recently been some significant disruptions in elections, and we are really honored today to talk about the state of Nigeria, the state of democracy, and the future of this great African nation, which has inspired many successful immigrants to come to North Carolina and succeed and thrive. One of those is my dear friend, Dr. Alphonse Ekile Ngwadam, who is a leader in the Nigerian community, but also very actively involved in the nation of Nigeria and their fight for democracy. I'm going to welcome Mark Lee, but Mark, if we can bring um, Dan Asakwe, Mark, if we can bring on the other guests that are here with us today.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. It's Dan Asake, who I was talking to earlier, and I believe he's coming to us from Nigeria. We're still waiting for the other gentleman to come in as well. But Dr. Asake is here, and he can explain some of the things that are going on over there in Nigeria. I do know that they
Hello,
had
can you
that
hear me?
powerful election and everything. So how are you doing,
Hello.
Mr. Asake?
Dr. Osake,
Can you hear me?
if you could for the audience, we're waiting for Dr. Ngwadam, but if you could for the audience, I wasn't able to do my research before this show. A little bit, all I know is that there's the Boko Haram, which is kind of this Islamic group that wants to run Nigeria, but there was recently an election where another candidate won. So for the audience, could you brief us on what has happened in Nigeria to date?
I can't hear you clearly, but let me just make the point clear. There's a general disenchantment about the outcome of the election. People are not happy. A lot was expected from the election, but the way the INEC handled the election has left a lot of people in doubt, and it placed a lot of credibility problems and questions on the outcome of the election.
Okay, so the election was in October, and who won that election?
Well, it's still being disputed, but from INEC announcement due to Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu, of course, who is a consummate politician and a prominent member of the ruling party, APC.
Mark, can you hear him?
I
Mark,
understand,
Yes, I can.
I understand that the other
Okay.
parties.
Mark, I can't hear him clearly, so if you could repeat. Mark, I'm going to let you drive the interview since I can't hear that well. If you could ask him, so he just said what happened in the election. So what I'm going to ask you the question, Dr. Sakwe, and then I want Mark to repeat the answers. What, Mark, you asked this question. What is the outcome of this election? Why should we be so concerned about democracy in Nigeria now?
Well, I can't hear you clearly, but let me just say that people are not happy with the outcome of the election. The opposition parties, Labour Party, People Democratic Party, NPP, they are not happy with the election, and I think they want to challenge that election result in court. But I think the major issue came in the process of the election and announcement of results. INEC did not do what it's supposed to be. INEC promised that they were going to use the Rivers and IREF to upload on-time results, but INEC never did. And that's where the problem came. Because as a build up to the election, most of the youth never wanted to vote. They don't want to participate in the election. But because of the fact that INEC promised that their vote and our vote was going to count, that was why a lot of people registered and came out to vote on election day. People voted under rain, people voted under sun, people voted up to midnight, around 12 midnight. And at the end of the day, when the results were being collected and announced, INEC abandoned the responsibility of not giving on-time results as a promise. And that has created a lot of problems, disenchantment, disappointment, and people are angry, people are not happy.
Fantastic.
So is there a lot of protests going on in the streets? I do know that historically speaking, of course, here in the United States, we've had a Black Lives Matter movement and everything, but I understand that there were some similar type movements. We used to have a show here on the network called The Mind Closet, where the gentleman was from Nigeria, and he was talking about the police force there in Nigeria and how even there was a conflict between, say, the youth and the police. So has that played into the elections at all? Because I know movement of police injustices in Nigeria, just like there's been in the United States as well. But I'm just wondering if you could talk about that and maybe how that impacted the election.
Well, as a build up to the election, like I said before, as a build to the election, you discover that people were not really, there was a kind of apathy. People were not ready, because based on the elections we've had in this country over the years, most of them have ended in all those elections. The results are not being credible, are being manipulated. But in this one, like I said, to the build up, INEC sold it in such a way that our votes will count, our votes were going to count, and everything about the build up to the election, people believed in INEC. But like I said, there were some, because the ruling party lost in some states. It was not supposed to lose in presidential election. They lost in Lagos State. They lost in Nasarawa State, which is a stronghold. They lost in Plateau State, a stronghold of the APC. And of course, in Edo State, Labour Party won. Labour Party won in Delta State and won in the whole of the Southeast. Those were the kind of, it never happened before for a party that just came on stream in November, October last year to have made such an impact. So it really came out. They came out en masse, particularly the youth. If you look at the demography of the youth voting population, this time they came out believing that a vote will count. And at the end of the day, like I said, INEC handled it in such a way that the youth feel disappointed. And not only do they feel disappointed, they are still pushing that they want their mandate to be actualized. And that is why probably today, there's a kind of, even going towards the election on Saturday, most of them have a kind of apathy towards it, what has happened. But I think the government is trying to manage the situation. But we want to see what the court will do and who will eventually be sworn in as Nigerian president. But for now, it is still a stalemate.
Now, that makes a lot of sense, and we're going to bring Tony on very shortly as well. But one of the questions I had for you, Mr. Asakwe, is for those that are watching from the United States and from the West, because we are aired in a number of countries and everything, why is Nigeria important? Because we do know that there are a lot of people that have been paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine and other parts of the world, including Europe and Asia. But why do you feel that Nigeria is important to the global economy and to the global environment and everything? Because I know a lot of times folks won't think about that, and I do know that there are some riches there in Nigeria as well. So from a global standpoint, why do you think that country is important? Dr. Dan? I don't know if Dr. Dan could hear me and everything, so I'm going to bring up Lee Newton Rhodes as well, because it looks like Dan might have frozen. I'm also going to see if Tony's available as well. So I'm going to see if Tony's available, but I'll bring up Lee as well. And there's Tony and everything. Tony, I don't know if you heard that last question I was asking Mr. Asakwe and everything, but a lot of times people are wondering about the importance of a country like Nigeria and everything. And hopefully Steve will be joining us as well. But if you could just share, if you can get off mute and share maybe a little bit about the importance of the country of Nigeria, I'm sure we would love to hear that from you. Hopefully.
Good morning, Tony. There's a mute button down on the bottom. Please click on it so we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm back. Good morning. I'm back. It's a little cold. I'm outside at a coffee shop, but hopefully you can see me.
Yeah.
We want to thank once again. Hopefully you can. We got Tony Nadi with us.
Right.
Who, Tony, we're waiting for Dr. Ngwadam, but Tony, could you go ahead and share with us a little bit? Oh, he's coming.
Yeah. Hopefully Tony can get it. There we go. Tony, like I was asking you earlier, a lot of people are probably wondering why Nigeria would be such an important part on the global environment and everything. And if you could tell us a little bit about your organization as well, I'm sure folks would love to hear about that as well.
Yeah, I can barely hear you. I might want to speak now.
Yes, please. Yes,
we can
please.
hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, right. It's barely coming through here, but if you can hear me, I'm glad to join you to report what's going on here.
Yeah.
I just left a press, engagement on how it is being managed on ground. What happened on the 25th of February cannot pass for election, even by the Nigerian standard. And we're happy that the global, observe, the ones who came from outside Nigeria to observe, had confirmed that was the case, because first there was the electoral law under which the process had to be managed. The INEC bypassed that law that required results to be uploaded real time as they were happening, so that those who witnessed the counting of the vote will also witness the transmission of the results. That was the whole purpose of the BVA. And so they suspended, they disabled the BVA from INEC headquarters. That was why the results did not come in. And so 72 hours after everybody had dispersed, they started uploading. And so the outcome that has been published as a winner is a very far cry from what happened. And people are not going to accept it. The second deficiency, which is even more serious, is the one of the Constitution, the requirement to be returned as winner. You had to have the overall number, the overall highest number of the valid votes. You had to have the spread. There are 36 states in Nigeria. You are required to have at least 25% in 2/3 of the states, meaning 24 states, and 25% of the Federal Capital Territory votes. These are constitutional requirements. If any candidate does not, if the candidate, none of the candidates meets these three conditions, they were supposed to proceed to a runoff to see whether they will get at something. The INEC chairman and the INEC, knowing fully well that the candidate they've declared winner did not obtain that 25% in the Federal Capital Territory, went ahead to announce the result and said everybody should go to court. Of course, people have little confidence in what the courts will do. That's about the election and the outcome. But I had the last question you raised. I think it was to the last speaker, but I can take it, about why the world should pay attention. In 2019, I led a team that spent 7 months in Washington engaging, decision maker, the policy beltways, from the legislative branch to the executive branch. Of course, the executive manages the foreign relations, what the US does outside. The global terror networks, the reason the world should listen now is that the global terror networks have converged in the West African sub-region from the Middle East. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all of them.
Yeah.
They are here with Nigeria as a hub. Our president, the Buhari, and his Fulani kinsmen, the ones you call Fulani herdsmen, it wasn't anything about herdsmen or farmers clashing with herdsmen. It was Fulani invasion. The Fulani are coming from all over the Sahel. The Boko Haram is the local franchise of those terror networks, and they formed ISWAP together. And what they wanted to do in Syria and Iraq, which they couldn't do, is what they are doing in the West African sub-region. They are going to suck in the entire West Africa. They are going to have at their disposal Nigeria's sovereign assets, including military assets. And if the rest of the world does not come in good time, like we try to urge the US to do, and I can report the US did very well in placing Nigeria on a watch list and putting Nigeria up as a country of particular concern because of the involvement of the leaders of Nigeria, particularly the president of Nigeria and his government, in the terror that was happening and spreading. And so if the rest of the world does not pay attention, the global terror networks have converged here, and they're going to become several times more powerful than they used to be. They've never had the kind of assets they have in their hands right now. And if and when they begin to unleash, I tell you, whatever anybody saw before about terror will become a child's play in what could happen. And so we went to Washington with a template, with something that could be the solution to the problem. And we placed our constitution, the Constitution of Nigeria, at the center of that solution. 3/4 of Nigeria, even more, but in the minimum 3/4, agreed that the constitution imposed on Nigeria by this Fulani, who have now come to take the territory for themselves to become operational base for the terror networks of the world. We hear the stories every day. It's human beings who are counting dead here. And if the rest of the world will look away, when they finish with those who are already here, who they already encircled, they're going to go, they have more facility. We're talking about 3 million barrels of crude oil being sold every day. The entire money of it is in their hands. Just a few weeks ago, we were dealing with a situation where you know what they call ways and means. 22 trillion naira, which translates to $30 billion, had been taken from the treasury without any form of mention, not to talk of authorization, between Buhari and his central bank manager, the one they call a Emefiele, central bank governor. $30 billion. And when you saw the kind of interface between the terror networks, you saw when the train terror attack happened, they made demands and government was paying them money. You saw when the Kuje prison was broken and up to 150 of their commanders were free in a situation where the military unit that was supposed to be providing security in that prison area, because that's where they kept all the people they had arrested, all the terrorists they had arrested since the time of Jonathan. The unit was withdrawn. They were not there when these attackers came, and all those commanders were freed. The next thing we saw was in October of 2022. You remember when the US had to evacuate? Because suddenly terror was in the air. They actually visited one of the facilities, but before they could unleash, they were caught up with. And then one thing led to the other, and there was that evacuation at the time. That is how close we are to abandoning Nigeria and the West African sub-region into the hands of these terror networks. This election is supposed to be the point at which we could defeat what they were doing. But what has happened is that they have been allowed, the man they declared the winner now, his running mate is known to be the one at the center of how Boko Haram was established in Nigeria. If anything happens to this candidate, the Tinubu that they've declared winner of the APC Buhari's party, if mosquito were to bite him today and he drops dead, the person that will be sworn in as Nigeria's president is the very head of the Boko Haram you've been hearing about. And that will tell you how close Nigeria and the rest of the world is to the disaster about to happen. And so if we have a chance to stop them from getting that far, I think everybody should bring whatever they have. And there's enough of local initiative that could be supported if people will listen. But if they don't listen, of course, they're already killing us. We don't matter. But I tell you, the US will pay in blood. The rest of Europe will pay in blood when this monster assumes full control of Nigeria's sovereign assets. And what goes with it. Nigeria's international clout will be in their hands. We saw what happened with Iran. Yeah. As you could identify the Iranian before he gets to you. How are you going to identify the ones who come from here? Because they are blacks in the US. I think it's an emergency. So it's not a question of whether it's PDP or APC that wins. It is that constitution that enables them do what they're doing that has to go down. Our proposition in NINAS, which we shared with the US, and we answered questions for 7 months between Washington and New York, because it came to where, you remember in 2019 when they sent the Agnes Calama, rapporteur mission to Nigeria. It was in further interrogation of our propositions about what could be done. That constitution is what we say must go down. What we need to do is what South Africa did in 1990 to halt the journey to any further elections, even this one that has already collapsed. I can report to you that no election has happened in Nigeria. If the global committee will listen to us, we'll stop now and go to transition so that we can get rid of this. Buhari has been there for 8 years. If he hasn't been able to take over the place up till now, he's not going to be able to do so, except we allow him to get away with this brigandage we've seen that they call elections. I think that's the report for today.
Hey, Mr. Tony and everything. One of the things I was curious about, and I'm gonna bring in Sasha Starr, who's one of our folks as well. And of course, I do see that Professor Kelly is here as well. But I do know that one of the things that Sasha has brought up, and I know that it is of importance to a lot of folks, is the importance of China and how China has been playing an impact on African countries and everything. And I know that y'all have reached out to the United States to get aid from the United States, and I imagine from other Western nations as well. But I was just wondering your take on the Chinese influence on Africa, because we do know that China has definitely tried to do a lot to go into not just Nigeria, but other parts of the African continent as well. And I know that Sasha has brought this up on a couple of times that he has been on the shows here as well. So I was just wondering your take on the Chinese influence and everything in that nature. So, and I'm also going to bring up Professor Kelly as well, so he might have some thoughts about that also. So I'd love to hear either one of your thoughts about the Chinese influence on what's going on in Africa.
Okay, thank you, Mark. China is taking very pragmatic and very strategic approach to African countries. Basically, it builds. It builds influence there. It offers cultural centers, studies of Chinese languages, and they're taking very, very long-term approach. They're looking ahead of 50,
states, meaning 24 states.
Sorry, I don't understand. Somebody asking me a question? Oh, okay. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Professor Kelly, glad that you're here with us as well. I know you're a friend of Steve's, but did you have any thoughts about what's going on in Nigeria and the influence of both the West and even like China and some of the other influential places as well that are playing their role in what's happening?
Welcome, Dr. Nguadam. Can you hear us? I don't know if he can hear us.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Is he frozen? All right.
He seems to be frozen and everything. So we'll hopefully get an answer from him in a little bit as well. And if Tony wants to chime in also, but that is something that I know a lot of folks are paying attention to. It does look like he is still frozen.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, hello, Akili.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
We can hear you, Professor Kelly. Oh, he just disappeared. So.
Yeah, I can hear loud and clear.
Mark, ask him if he can hear us.
Can you hear us, Professor
like
Kelly?
Tony's still talking.
Yeah, I'm talking.
No, I'm done speaking, Prof.
I think we're having audio issues.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some audio issues going on and everything, and we'll hopefully get those cleared up in a matter of minutes.
Akili, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to bring up another part of Africa that is going on because it definitely tropical cyclone Freddie has hammered Mozambique for the second time, and it definitely looks like along with that same storm, Malawi has declared a state of disaster as nearly 200 were killed, and they're saying that more than 100 have been killed in southern Africa as Storm Freddie is doing its damage in that part of the African continent and all in that space. And of course, we do know in other news that was taking place in the world, and of course, we do want to hear more about what's happening in Nigeria, that fentanyl was in the news as well, because apparently Mexican pharmacies are selling fentanyl-laced drugs in tourist areas. So that is one of the other things that is going on. And lawmakers are calling for a Mexico travel advisory over reported counterfeit drug sales. So that is something that we're seeing in that space to the south of our border as well. And like I said, while we're trying to get things straight with our fine folks from Nigeria and some of the conversations that they are having, I did have a question for Sasha, because there was an article in today's Washington Post that says that not Russia, but Ukraine is short of skilled troops and munitions as losses and pessimism are growing. And that was not something that I had been hearing reported lately, but that does sound like that is something that at least the Washington Post is saying. And I know that I've heard you talk about the impact of pessimism on the Russian forces, but I wasn't thinking that it was impacting those very valuable soldier out of Ukraine. But is the Washington Post on to something? Because they're definitely saying that after the very bloody winter, that both Ukraine and Russia are looking for a decisive spring campaign one way or the other. But are you at all worried, Sasha, about a loss of skilled troops and munitions, the very valiant of Ukraine?
Yes, I'm aware that there are certain types of ammunition which are lacking in Ukrainian army. The fact that they're losing skilled troops, it's evident because the country is for more than a year is fighting the Russian army. So obviously, the more experienced troops are exposed to fierce attacks by Russians, especially lately in Bakhmut area. But that is not having any effect on the will of Ukrainians to defend their country and continue to fight. In fact, what I've learned just that yesterday, there was the meeting of Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff, and decision on Bakhmut was made. The decision was to defend it at all cost. They have very, very skillful troops right there, and they're the best of the best, and they are inflicting incredible losses on Russian army, and they hold on to it because this will be a trampoline for the upcoming Ukrainian attack all over there. And interestingly enough, the latest information what I've got is that it's much easier actually to defeat Russians and take over the Crimea area than Donetsk and Lugansk area, the Donbass area. Why? Because the Donetsk and Lugansk, especially Donetsk region, they are heavily fortified, and it would take, unless you're using super strong artillery, HIMARS and missiles and so on, it would be very, very difficult to penetrate. However, Crimea, once it's cut from the supply through the attack on Zaporizhia region, it cannot be reinforced because obviously the Kerch bridge will be destroyed anytime when the attack of the Ukrainians will start, and the Crimea army, Russian army, will be completely cut off from any supplies, any reinforcement, and there will be only choice to die or to give up and just.
Can we hear Dr. Nguadam? Dr. Nguadam, can you hear us? I guess his audio is not working.
Yeah, the audio is not working.
Can I get Sasha a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Can you?
We hear you, Doctor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Let's go to Dr.
Okay.
Nguadam.
Well,
Please.
thank you for the show. My purpose and reason for coming into this show.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Well, see, Mike, actually, the election in Nigeria, the reason I wanted to attend this particular show today is the U.S., Great Britain's reaction to the result of the election that they know that is 100% flawed. And for U.S. government to send a congratulatory message to the so-pronounced winner of the election when they know that the so-called winner did not really win the election. The Independent Republican Institute and National Democratic Institute sent 40 representatives as observers to this election. And you can go and read their report and their recommendations. Everything about the election and the outcome is not correct. And if you go further, Mark Page, if you go to the African, if you go to the report given by Matthew Page, Associate Fellow of African Program, he stated clearly that he is baffled by the recommendation and the pronouncement of the U.S. State Department to acknowledge this report or the election result as a good one. That gets me really worried. U.S. a champion of democracy in the world, to see what happened in Nigeria and accept that as a democratic process is very shameful. And I'm speaking because as a person who participated in the election of Joe Biden, I was the co-chair of the battleground state on the southeastern part of the United States for the African diaspora here in the United States to make sure that Joe Biden wins the election. Since he won, we have seen a down spiral of a democratic support in any of the African policy, and particularly in Nigeria.
So do you think?
And I do not understand why. I am a Democrat, but right now I feel like I want to be a Republican because during Trump administration, Trump put Nigeria on a watch list. The Boko Haram is a terrorist that the whole world knows. And this government that have just so conducted an election is planning to hand over to Boko Haram leadership and make Nigeria an Islamic state. All the plan has been concluded. I do not understand the U.S. policy anymore. And I am very, very disturbed. And I know my people back in Nigeria are well disturbed about their stand.
Do you
I
think?
need anybody in the state government to tell us why they are treating Nigeria as people who do not matter. And they focus on Eastern and Western Europe and Asia and make Nigeria the most populous nation in the world, black nation in the world, as if they don't matter. I need some answers, and my people need some answers.
Well, real quickly, do you think, gentlemen, the question I have for the panel is, and maybe I can start with Sasha. Sasha, do you think that, and first of all, Dr. Nguadam, we thank you for your insights. Do you think that so much of the focus is on Ukraine that we're not focusing on other democracies as well? Because we've talked about that South America, Nigeria, authoritarianism. Is this? I mean, how do we work to convey to the administration that this is happening in Nigeria? Sasha, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that before the war started in February of last year, Ukraine was taking a lot of space in the information and in all the government and society's concerns, simply because it was one of many countries in Europe, former socialist republic, and so it deserves actually, in my opinion, very little attention, and there was no reason to give the attention. However, once Russians started this horrible war, and on both sides, by the time that we talk now, well over 250,000 people perished. 250,000, it's a very large number in 1 year, 250,000 people. And it's a fierce fighting which has no end to it. I don't see any peaceful negotiations anytime soon. And that has a lot of devastating effect on a world trade, on a grain supply, on many other issues that affect many countries, including those in Africa and elsewhere. So I don't think that Ukraine deserves any special space in information coverage, except that it affects too many people everywhere. And the energy prices, the food prices, and everything is all. And essentially, all of us have to pay consequences for that. So it's happening naturally. I don't think that there are some forces that are playing. Okay, let's talk about Ukraine. Let's stop talking about Africa and Asia and Latin America and everything else. Talk only about Ukraine. I don't see that happens.
Well, what advice, Dr. Nguadam? I'm going to ask you, and Dan to weigh in. The last 10 minutes, we might roll over tomorrow to talk about the bank fallout. There's been lots of concerns about the banking crisis and the other banks that are going to follow. We're going to continue our discussion on Biden's $6.8 trillion budget. And the Trump election, DeSantis and Trump. It's starting to heat up now with some sparring going on in Iowa, but between Haley, DeSantis, Trump. But Dr. Nguadam, what is your ask now then of the U.S. government? What message do we want to convey to the president, the Congress, the Senate? What do you want? What do you want us, the White House, to do?
What I am expecting the U.S. government to do, one, they sent an observer. They should listen to those observers, that is made up of the bipartisan, both Republican and Democrat together. Their report, one. Two, set a transitional government, set up a panel for a transitional government, because Nigeria do not really have elections. They have selections. They don't have elections. And there is something that probably U.S. government, as the champion and beacon of democracy, can step in. Do you
Okay, I
not
hear you.
looking
I
at
hear you.
trade and the economic policies? We don't need all that. We need a sound democratic structure that it can put in place. More than 80% of youth are languishing. Let them step in and
Okay.
call a freeze on all the processes, all the right wing Islamism that is pushing into Nigeria and make it an Islamic state. Step in and conduct a referendum to decide whether Nigeria wants to still be one union, or they want people from different regions to have their independent countries. They did that in Yugoslavia. They did that in Russia. They did that in India. I don't understand why our own is a different case.
Okay.
Professor Kelly, do you think that is a possibility? Because I know that
So
there have
I'm
been
expecting them, please, set up a panel.
Yeah, the question I was asking is, do you think that there's a
Let them
possibility
set
that
up a panel.
Nigeria?
Let them send with their observers, make it happen with the British government.
Professor Kelly, I was wondering, do you think
I'm sorry.
there is a possibility that Nigeria will split in half and that it will break up and everything? Because I do know that has happened in some other African nations. So is there a possibility that Nigeria will split in half? And if so, what kind of impact would that have on the oil industry? Because I do know that Nigeria is a major oil distributor and everything. So if you could talk maybe a little bit about the oil impact that Nigeria has as well, and also whether there is a fear of a split of Nigeria.
Yes. Is there a fear of a split in your country?
It is a possibility. And as I can tell you, okay, listen to me very carefully, because this is already ongoing. There is a conquest mission by the right-wing Islamic extremists in the West African region. The ISIS, the Al-Qaeda, all the terrorist organizations we all are pursuing, American pursuing in the Middle East, have moved to the West African region. And as I'm talking to you, Nigeria have a constitution that guides them. 12 states out of those 36 states have declared the Sharia. They undermined the constitution that the entire country put together to govern them. These 12 states are now Islamic states. They don't care about the Federal Republic of Nigeria constitution. Now, the rest of other states in the south and in the west are already galvanized themselves to form an independent country. The people in the middle belt, the people in the southwest, and the people in the southeast. There is nothing wrong with each of them having 4 countries, and there's nothing wrong with that. Each of these regions have enough resources to sustain themselves as an independent state. It is just the Islamic right-wing fundamentalists that are pushing for an agenda for an Islamic state to control every region in that area. And they know it. British government knows that. US government knows that. Why they are being blindsided and quiet and silent and not doing anything about it is what baffles me. We will survive. And if nothing has happened, I am telling you, US government and British government, Europe, will never contain 200 million refugees because it's going to snap. It will. I'm guaranteeing you that. And as I'm talking to you, this election is a distraction. The conquest and the killing and going into villages and resettling all the Islamic fundamentalist people in Nigeria is ongoing as we speak. The election is a distraction. The present government is planning to hand over to Boko Haram. Before you know it, all this insecurity and all this thing you see is a manufactured thing. It is an ongoing conquest. And there's nothing stopping them. And what worries me is that US is standing by to see another Rwanda, Burundi happen again in Nigeria.
Well,
That is my worries. Because I have families back there. I have families. Every Nigeria, we have over 1 million Nigerians in US. They all have families. Why is US government playing an ostrich in this whole thing? That baffles me.
Lee, you've running as a presidential candidate. You've actually been involved in a number of political activities there in New York and everything. And I was just wondering your thoughts about Africa and whether we're paying enough attention to Africa as one that may, who knows, if the fates play that way, could be sitting in the White House one day and everything. So, Lee, I know that you've been very active on LinkedIn, but I don't know that you've asked that much about the African continent, but I'm just wondering your thoughts about what you're hearing from these gentlemen about Nigeria, which I do know has a lot of very powerful industries. It's got one of the leading oil reserves in the world, and I would argue it has one of the top filmmaking communities in the world as well, because Nollywood is a very real thing and everything. But I'm just wondering your take as somebody that is involved in politics and might have some thoughts about this important issue.
I totally agree with what the professor was saying. I think the media in Washington downplay, ignore what's going on that continent. A lot of Americans, I don't think they can name the countries and where they are in Africa.
And also, it's such a booming economy, almost 1 billion people. So from an economic perspective, there's a lot of economic trade opportunity. And I find it very
100%.
interesting. Now, there was a recent summit about Africa that the vice president and president hosted in Akile, where they talked about the Artemis Accords, and I can't remember what it was, space exploration with Africa. But then we never heard anything. So I agree with Lee. Perhaps one solution as a public official, I'm going to work on maybe bringing in Deborah Ross from a U.S. Congress for a town hall meeting with Nigerian community next month. So I think that's one thing we can do, because I think it's important to let our congresswoman know, along with Congresswoman Fouché, who represents Durham, but we bring both of them in she replaced David Price to talk about this issue. I think
Steve, I think
Professor Kelly, one of the other things that I've been hearing about lately, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is there has been a push. I know some folks that are even associated with this network that have been involved with that, about alliances, because you talked about the various Nigerians that are here in the United States, and there's also a very thriving entrepreneurial community in the African American community as well. And there has been some conversations about alliances because of shared skin color and maybe shared ethnicity. So what is some of your thoughts around some of that going on? Because we do know that happens in India. It happens with India and Indian Americans. It happens in some other groups as well. But I was just wondering, do you think that there needs to be a stronger alliance between those of African American descent and those that are from the various African continents, even though a lot of us don't know which continent we're from originally? Professor Kelly?
That's correct. Let me give a synopsis of the composition of Nigeria as a nation. In 1804, a group of Islamic fundamentalists invaded Nigeria and had a jihadist named Othman Danfodio. And he brought in a very tiny militia of Fulanese into the country. And when they conquered the original inhabitants of the northerners, called the Hausas, they enslaved them. And then the grandfather, he gave a script to his people, say, this estate called Nigeria is an estate of their great-grandchildren, that they are going to defend it, they are going to ruthlessly defend it, and make the Southerns part of that country a means to govern every part of the country. And they are going to dip Quran at the Atlantic Ocean so that every Nigerian will drink it. That was a proclamation by Ottoman Danfodio. And I can tell you, 150 years later, the great-grandchildren of that man are implementing that statement. Now, as we stand, we have not over 4 million Fulanis in Nigeria. The rest of other ethnic groups, even the Hausas, the youth, the elderly, everybody have realized that these people are on a conquest mission. They are there to take their land and their resources and make them, whether they like it or not, to be an Islamic worshipper. And we have 50-50 percentage of Christians and Muslims. So it's not about that. Other ethnic groups in America, in Europe, in Asia have come together to realize that we cannot be enslaved in our land. We have formed alliances. Ninas, who Tony Nadi represents as the Secretary General, and all of us, I am one of the representatives here in US, we have more than 167 ethnic groups signed alliance to come together to decide whether we are going to continue this union or not. And we have meetings. Everybody's on board. Let me tell you, if the US government and British government is not supporting this tiny 4 million Fulanis in Nigeria, they will not do anything. Because they have the backings of the US. And I want to know why US is playing this type of dirty politics in the lives of 200 million people. I don't understand it. It behooves my understanding as somebody who believes that America is the greatest country in the world. Why they are playing this type of politics, I don't know. And they need to explain to the world, if they are the champion of democracy, what they have done in this last election tells me that they are not a democratic country.
Yeah, I hear you. One of the questions I had, I was going to actually turn it back to Ukraine really quickly. I know we've got the Ukrainian show in about a few minutes, and I do have one other news from Latin America as well. But Sasha, one of the things that I was curious about, and I know a lot of other people are curious about it, and I'm actually going to tie the questions a little bit together and everything, is there is a country, there's a area there in Russia that a lot of folks are fighting very solidly for, but I understand it's a very small city and everything. I don't think it's as small as Morrisville, but it might be as small as Durham and everything. So why is Bakhmut so important to everybody if it is such a small city? It doesn't sound like it's a major metropolitan city. It might be because of where it is located and everything. And then the thing that I was going to possibly loop the two conversations in together is it does seem like a lot of these militant groups, whether it's in Ukraine or in Nigeria, are actively recruiting people from the high schools. And we know a lot of times high school kids are not that aware of what they are fighting for. Even our own military kids aren't always aware of what they're fighting for, but it does look like the Wagner group into my high schools looking for young warriors. I imagine the same thing is happening with some of these groups in
Mark, I'll get to
Nigeria, where they are going to look for young people.
I'll get to Bakhmut in a few seconds. First, let me address the Africa issue that Wagner Group is in fact very active in several African countries. And what they do is they create a lot of corruption, confusion, money laundering. They're involved in selling arms and corrupting local governments. And Nigeria, thanks, is not one of these countries. More African, Central African republics. There are a few other countries. I want to tell you, Steve, you mentioned that you want to talk to some politicians about African or Nigerian issues or so on. If it makes you feel good, please proceed and do exactly that. But however, let me be frank with you. Besides Wagner Group, who is extremely active in Africa and controls in many countries all finances, drug trafficking and everything else, China is there, very, very involved, and is doing a lot from position of soft power and so on. Because for them, it's 100, 200, maybe 500 years project. Now, U.S. doesn't have that long attention span. It got already tired after 1 year of war in Ukraine. So to go in Africa for the next 500 years for a country like United States of America, it's mission impossible. Just make sure that you understand that. Okay, the Bakhmut. You have to look at the map of Ukraine. Unfortunately, I don't have it to show it to you, but there are going a line of front that Bakhmut right in the middle of that. And unless Russians can take it over and completely control it, they cannot move forward, because what's happening is that once, let's see, a normal strategy would have been forget about the Bakhmut, okay, let the Ukrainians hold it, but go in by sides or both from the right and the left side, and then continue the attack. But it's impossible because Bakhmut is being reinforced, and then those sides which went to attack bypassing Bakhmut, they will be encircled and killed, all of them. There will be very few prisoners. Most of these people will be just simply killed. Now, so Russians understand that before they could move really forward, they must capture Bakhmut. But Bakhmut is the key to all their so-called great offensive, which started sometimes mid-January or so on, and now it's hold right there. So when Russians are talking about that they're going to send missiles and defeat London and Paris and Berlin and whatever else, guess what? For almost a year, they cannot take over Bakhmut, a city at the best was 80,000 population. Now it's about less than 10. Most of these people disappeared. Most of the people were killed. Most of the people left the city and just moved elsewhere. So that's a story of Bakhmut. A lot of people are being killed as we speak. And unfortunately, that's
Yes.
the reality of this war. It reminds me something of a Stalingrad battle during the Second World War, where the fight is for each house, each door, everywhere. So
Sasha, you mentioned China really quickly, and apparently the White House is encouraging President Xi to reach out to President Zelensky, but there's no confirmation of that meeting. But apparently, Xi is looking to speak with Zelensky for the first time since the Ukrainian war broke out and everything. So is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And do we like the fact that the White House is encouraging these two folks to have that conversation?
well, listen, everyone is trying to create a situation for peaceful negotiations. This is what responsible politics are trying to do. Now, at this moment, the both sides, Ukrainians and Russians, are so far apart in their expectations, in their demands, and what each side think is acceptable, the solution for this war, that it's impossible to believe that Chairman or Emperor Xi would make a huge impact on that. I just don't understand what he's going to offer to Zelensky, something that has not been offered to him yet. What is he going to tell him? To concede to Russia 20% of its territories is not non-starter. What else is going to tell him?
Yes. We're coming. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
We're coming into the tail end of the show, but we want to thank Dr.
I know we're coming to the tail end and everything. Before we get to the tail end, I know you wanted the professor to give some closing remarks. I was just going to mention two other news stories that I kind of alluded to, but I didn't get to and everything. But apparently, a ghost suburb with $87.7 million worth of cocaine and two bodies aboard was seized off of the coast of Colombia. So a lot of people are definitely excited about Colombia as a tourist attraction, but there's also drug trafficking that goes there as well. And it was the Colombian Navy that seized that particular drug sub and everything. So that was a big capture for the Colombian Navy and everything in that space. And a government that you are very familiar with, the Indian government, has declared its opposition to same-sex marriage in their Supreme Court case. So they have a Supreme Court as well, and apparently their Supreme Court is going against the whole same-sex marriage kind of thing in that space. So that might be something we want to bring folks on from that community to see what they think about what is happening
It is a
in
little
that
bit.
way.
It's a little bit more of a conservative regime in India. Well, we're going to close out.
Before I leave,
Please.
before the back, Steve, before we go, I just want to request for something, please.
Yes.
Just 1 minute.
Yes.
Please. Yeah, you have the floor is
Okay.
yours, my friend.
I am asking the U.S. government to send an envoy. Let them send for a special envoy to Nigeria. A special envoy to meet the Nigerian Indigenous Nationality for Self-Determination Alliance and to meet with the youth, not to the north only, all the people in Nigeria, to sit down and discuss the future of Nigeria. We cannot get there by this election or any election. The most populous people in Nigeria are craving for self-determination. It is something to worth looking into because already we have all the constitutions to make it happen. All I'm asking is they can send a special envoy to mitigate the circumstance on the ground right now so that we can avoid the bloodshed because it's coming. It's coming. Let them not ignore it. I am requesting that we send all our emissaries to go to that region to make it happen because the 200 million refugees cannot be contained by United States.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm definitely going to turn it over to Steve. And I was actually going to allude to something that Sasha kind of alluded to earlier and everything, which is the Chinese influence in world politics and everything. Because one of the other things that I had seen in the news yesterday that we didn't get to, and maybe we'll talk about it on tomorrow and some of the upcoming shows, is the and you talked earlier, some of the Nigerians did about the influence of what is going on in some of the Islamic nations and everything. But Iran and Saudi Arabia are reestablishing relationships, and apparently there's a lot of folks that are concerned that the U.S. is watching from the sidelines and that there is some U.S. apathy in that part of the world. But China is not having apathy. Apparently, China is paying a lot of attention and is actually even brokering that deal. And I don't know if Lee's got any thoughts about that, but it does look like China is.
Mark, I just got a quick question for Sasha regarding Ukraine.
Okay.
We're in March now, March 2023. March 2024 is the next election. Is it on hold or still scheduled for Ukrainian people?
No, it's not on hold. It's scheduled and it will be held. I never heard anything otherwise.
Yeah.
Now, concerning U.S. reaction on the Saudi and Iranian affairs and so on, U.S. has very little possibilities to affect world politics all over the world. It's just physically impossible because there is a huge fight between two political parties in the United States, namely, the Democrats and Republicans. And therefore, each question, if one side says so, the other side will criticize it and say, this is a huge mistake, it's not going to work, or so on. So in at least in one, even such obvious thing that the war in Ukraine started by Russians, killed 250,000 people on both sides, and so on, even that one, on the surface, it should have been unite all politicians, the Democrat and Republicans, and so on, because it's so obvious violations of any human rights, any world order, and any considerations from Russians. So they should be punished one way or another. Even that, there is no unity. There are noisy, this Trumpist fraction in the House that says, well, Trump just recently says if he's elected, no penny, no more help to Ukraine, and so on. And we know his position about Russia. We heard it publicly when he, in a meeting in Helsinki, when he said, well, FBI says so, and Putin says the opposite, and I'm inclined to believe Putin. So he betrayed his own the institution and so on. So I don't want to go into it, really. I've made my point. Thank you.
You made your point,
Well,
and
folks,
we're going to toss it over
we're
to
over time.
Steve.
We're over time.
We're
So
over
we want
time. The
We'll
only thing I
close
was
out.
going
We're 1 minute
Yeah.
over. We got to go. Thank you all for being with us. Dr. Ngwadam, thank you for your fight for Nigerian freedom. Democracy will bring you back on in a few weeks. And we want to thank all of you who are listening for this wonderful, engaging discussion. Catch up tomorrow on the banking crisis and politics in Iowa for the Republican nomination for
Hey,
president.
Steve, I know
Thank you
we're
all so
ending,
much.
but I do have one quick question for you. Are you going to be rushing off to China and everything? Because apparently China is reopening its borders and they're resuming all visas to tourists. So I just want to know whether you're going to be heading over to
No.
China anytime soon.
No, I got invited to speak with the mayor of Morrisville, and I'm not going. I decided I don't think it's safe to travel to China. Thank you.
Point taken. So we
All right.
can get on out of here, and let's get on out of here, and we'll have some more engaging conversation on tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen.